Hiya. So if anybody was expecting the other Mark Cairney to be speaking about LIBOR rates, I hope you're not too disappointed. My name's Mark Cairney, not Cairney, and I'm based in the IT infrastructure division of Edinburgh University, and I'm basically the guy that runs the Shibboleth IDP service at the university, along with a number of things. This talk basically came about because at our Christmas night out, me and a couple of my colleagues were discussing coming to FLOSS UK, what talks we would be given, etc. And this was basically the only one that my other colleagues actually said they would actually be interested in hearing. So that's why it got picked. So you've been spared the OpenUP talk, which is probably a good thing. So this is basically talking about federated access management. I've tried to keep it as relatively non-technical, and I've tried to avoid being too shibboleth-centric, but it is more or less a shibboleth talk because that's what I know. So I'll be basically talking about what federations are, how they work. Then I'll be going on to the sort of infrastructure, how it hangs together, and the various parts of that, and then I'll be kind of talking about what the current state of play is and what's going to possibly be happening in the future with regards it. So to start off with, what actually is federated access management? It's essentially a trust framework that's formed between institutions and services they want to use. The idea is that the user authentication is devolved to each institution via a locally installed identity provider or IDP, which plumbs into their own infrastructure, and then the authorization part is handled by the service provider or SP based on attributes that are sent to them by the IDP. The trust relationship is handled by both sides containing metadata that describes each other. So there's basically for every sort of element in the federation, both IDPs and SPs will basically get a big feed of all the metadata for all the IDPs and all the SPs, and in some cases, all the metadata for both. And that contains the trust information like keys, etc. The federation itself is responsible for managing and publishing that metadata and ensuring that it's correct for all members in that federation, so IDPs and SPs. So it's essentially a sort of benevolent dictatorship in that respect. And they're also responsible for establishing policies regarding how the data is exchanged, how the metadata is formed, what key types are used, etc., and ensuring that basically the best practice that they establish within their federation is adhered to by all the members. The federations themselves are established at a sort of geographical level. For example, in the UK, it's the UK Access Management Federation, who are based in Edina, which is sort of part of Edinburgh University, and they're also affiliated with JISC and Janet. But there are other ones like InCommon in the US, EduGain, which is a kind of a meta federation itself for Europe, which encompasses other federations within Europe as well. So we're now starting to see more of this sort of inter-federation agreements, basically federations basically sharing their metadata around with each other. So basically you can use your credentials to access resources that are made available to other federations like EduGain. So you end up with a sort of cross-federation trust framework as well. And this basically means that establishing standards and good practice becomes an even bigger problem than with interfederation, because you're suddenly talking about, a massive amount of services, and basically each federation itself is responsible for its members, but you can't basically go to somebody directly and say, stop, you're set up incorrectly. You have to sort of change how you do things. You have to basically go through their federation, and then their federation has to, and even try to spot these things, it's very difficult as well. But it isn't just about shibboleth, there are a number of competing federated solutions, both open source and commercial. Some people might be familiar with OpenAthens, which is provided by EduServe, which is open source, but it's not, but it's paid, but it's paid for on a sort of subscription level. There's Shibboleth itself. There's OpenAM, which I've seen here and there. There's for those of us who are into the dark side, there's Microsoft ADFS. If you've ever used Office 365, you may be familiar with that. And as I said earlier, I'll be looking at Shibboleth as it's what I know best because it's what I use, it's what I do. So no, not that I'm biased or anything. So I'll talk a little bit about Shibboleth itself. As I've mentioned earlier, it's free and open source. It's popular in the education sector, but it is sort of gaining traction out with the education sector, primarily because commercial companies that want to provide login systems that plug into an existing educational institute single sign-on. It's a sort of common standard. So they basically just set up a Shibboleth, and they don't have to do any work beyond that. And there's three main components that two I've mentioned already. There's the identity provider, or IDP, the service provider, or SP, and the discovery service, or DS, which used to be called the where are you from, which is basically used, which is a sort of optional component. So I'm just going to basically describe each of these in turn. So I'll start with the identity provider. So it's a locally installed server which integrates with that organization's local infrastructure, their own single sign-on setup, basically. So it can. So the idea is the user logs in with their own single sign-on credentials for their own university, be it AD, Kerberos, etc. And the IDP authenticates the user and then looks them up in a local identity source. Again, LDAP, AD, database, MySQL, that Postgres, Oracle, you name it. And then that user information is then parsed and processed, and only the attributes that are permitted to be sent to that service provider are sent back to it. So there is also this idea of, because universities are big on data protection, particularly for students, it should be, unless there's a specific agreement, it should be anonymized as where possible. And by default, all members of the UK Federation are sent a minimal set of attributes. One of them is called the targeted ID, which is basically a long hash, which is unique to the user and the service provider for each thing. And there's also this scoped affiliation, which basically tells them what kind of user they are, whether staff, student, and some people also will have alumni and library locker and a few other ones that are not really used much. So basically, but the basic idea is by default, all they know is that's a unique account for that person, but they don't know who it is, and they know what kind of account, what kind of user they are. So it's actually the onus is on them, if they need that information, is to get it from the user at their consent. I will be actually coming back to consent later on with when I mention the future stuff. And again, additional attributes have to be explicitly released by the IDP administrator. Examples of these would be the local username, and surname, first name, email address. You can send these things, but it's not done by default, so you have to have an agreement between the host identity provider and the service itself. And you can also have, depending on how you configure your IDP, you can have multiple metadata sources. It tends to be either you have the UK Federation one and a local one for your own sort of internal services, and for each one you can have multiple rules for disclosing these attributes as well. So that's that. We sort of discussed the IDP side of things. The service providers, which is the sort of target side of things. It's basically just it's an Apache module that performs a login to a service. If you've seen things like Cosine or CAS, you might be sort of familiar with this sort of idea. And as I said earlier, it receives a set of attributes from the identity provider, and it uses these to perform authentication and authorization of that person to their service. One important point is this means that because the service provider is performing the authorization decision based on this information that's sent to it by the identity provider, it's not the identity provider's job to perform authorization. The number of times we actually get service providers asking us to do this for them, I think the Federation have kind of nipped it in the bud, but it used to happen quite a lot, and it's not our job. We basically send them in. Our job is to send you the information, and for you to make a decision whether to let them in or not based on that. And then there's the sort of optional one, the discovery service, which was formerly known as the WAIF, or where are you from? And it basically just provides a list of the available IDPs. The UK Federation run a sort of general one, which has all the UK Federation IDPs in it, which is probably for a sort of free resource is probably okay for most people's use. If you're using it as a sort of paywall, like a lot of the large sort of e-journal providers do, they'll run their own discovery service, which will present a subset of these identity providers, basically the ones that have paid to use the resource. And it is optional. If you can in your service provider config, you can actually hardwire it to speak to a designated identity provider as well if you don't want to do this, if you just want a sort of one-to-one mapping, and that's how a lot of internal service providers would be set up. And the sort of glue that holds all this together is a language called SAML, which is Security Assertion Markup Language. It's a dialect of XML, and it's a sort of standard dialect for the IDPs and SPs to exchange these attributes and trust information between each other. There's two standards. There's SAML 1 and SAML 2. SAML 1's essentially sort of deprecated. You shouldn't really, if you're setting up a new service provider and for the first time you probably won't be using it or even presenting any SAML 1 endpoints. And it is possible because SAML is a sort of standard, and it's used by things like OpenUP and OpenUP, Shibboleth, and even Microsoft have got some sort of limited support for it with Office 365. It is possible to for different flavors of IDPs and SPs to speak to each other via SAML. Some of them work better with each other than others, and in some cases you just have to give up. But in theory, it is possible. So that's a kind of walkthrough of these sort of components. I'm now going to use my glamorous assistant, the Doge, to sort of demonstrate how this sort of basic happens in real life. So the user is the Doge. He goes to access the service provider to see the evening news because they provide a Shibboleth protected service to access the weekly news. So the service provider will then bounce it to either their discovery service or the UK Federation discovery service, which will then get bounced back to the service provider and then back to the user to select their IDP. So once it knows what IDP is associated with that user, the service provider then bounces it to that IDP, which the user then logs into. And then it goes back to the service provider, which then presents the user's logged in back. So he gets his services, and there he is. So he gets access to the news. So the idea is basically that the user logs into the service provider. The service provider then finds out what IDP is that user wants to use, which they then select. The user then logs into the IDP. And then the IDP bounces back to the service provider and then presents the logged in authenticated user with the content. That's the basic gist of it. there are additional sort of more complex things like out-of-band communication between service providers and identity providers, but I'm not going to go there because it just makes things too complicated. So a little bit about the Federation itself. I've got my UK Access Management Federation logo here as a little plug. As I said, the Federation's main role is to maintain and publish the metadata that's consumed by the member entities, i.e. the identity providers and service providers that are members of it. And this metadata is used to form the trust relationships because it contains information like a unique identifier and a public key that's used to identify and perform the encryption of the assertions between the two. So the Federation itself has ultimate responsibility for the metadata feed that's sent to their members and for ensuring that the members adhere to the good practice that's established by the Federation, so that the information is secure, that it's private, that they're using a suitably strong encryption. The one issue with this is because it's all done by the Federation, it's a little bit monolithic, which is there could be a little bit more devolvement there, really. And the InterFederation trust is more of a political challenge than a technical one because at a technical level, IDPs and SPs they don't really care what federation that the other entity is associated with. All they really care about is where it appears in the metadata, and they can trust it. So participating federations have to negotiate with each other common standards of how they structure their metadata, the key links that are used, where they use 509 certificates or fingerprints, and the sort of base level of the base attributes that are required. And in an ideal world, best practice wins. What tends to actually happen, at least for the UK Federation, is with the EduGain ones they consume is they basically they put the ones that actually adhere to their sort of standards in the metadata feed, and any ones that don't, they basically discard it and then tell EduGain that these ones don't. We're not including these service providers and identity providers because they don't adhere to our standards. So then it's up to EduGain to convince them to reconfigure their services. So the end result is you get an aggregated metadata feed that's published at both ends, by both EduGain and UK Federation, for example, with all the identity providers and all the service providers of both sort of interfederated federations. So you end up with a very large metadata file. I kind of mentioned other federated identity systems previously. Like I said, there's OpenUP, which is very similar to Shibboleth, and it's based on SAML 2. It's a commercial entity. It's run by EduServe. It was previously Athens DA, and then before that Athens. The idea is that you can run, but you do have to pay to use it. The idea is you can either run your own OpenUP IDP for a fee, or for a larger fee, you can actually ask OpenUP to run it for you on your behalf. So you can save yourself a little bit of work if you're happy to splash the cash. And as I said, the technology is very similar to Shibboleth in that it's SAML based, it's a monolithic federation, and the two actually interact with each other fairly well, and there is actually a number of OpenUP IDPs and SPs in the UK Federation metadata. EduRoam is also considered a federated identity system in that, and it's what's used in higher education for our wireless access points, and it's built in free radius. And the idea is that you can, if you've any institute that's got EduRoam, you can log into it with your own credentials for your own university or college or place of work, and it will basically relay that via free radius through the EduRoam network back to your home institution. So you actually log into your home institution's free radius server, and then and if that's successful, it's then relayed back to the WAP you're trying to connect to, and then if it's successful, then that lets you in. So it's basically it's basically a big mesh network essentially. And the federated part of that is managed and maintained in the UK by Janet, and as I said, external users' credentials are really back to their home institution for authentication. So that's kind of the current state of affairs. There's a few. I'm going to go a little bit about the future of federation. So the current models, they work very well for web-based authentication or for specific protocols, but they don't. They're very targeted and specific. There's a sort of increasing requirement, particularly in the high-performance computing industry, for support of multiple protocols with one system, and for a bit more devolved management. So as a management liaison of an IDP, I'd be responsible for the metadata at my institution rather than having to basically just vouch for people in the UK Federation as a whole being responsible for it. So we're basically trying to get them to trust us a little bit more in that respect. So Shibboleth 3.3 has just came out. I'll admit that I've not actually had a chance to install it myself yet, but I have been reading up on it. And it's still going to be SAML 2 based, but it's got a number of improvements and bug fixes based on what they've learned with version 2. The biggest improvement that I noticed was they've now got this idea of user consent for releasing attributes, so it's going to be a little bit more like Facebook or Google Plus when you log in. The user will actually be prompted with basically saying you're trying to log into this service. They want to know your email address, your name. Do you agree to send this? Yes or no. So that's hopefully means there'll be less of this idea of having minimal attributes presented and then having to get data from the user directly, or having to get the institute's IDP to agree to send it to you. And another thing with this is more the sort of high availability stuff, is because they've had problems with the clustering with version 2 in the past. They're looking to put more of the state client side in an encrypted cookie store. So the idea is that hopefully there'll be less state having to be maintained between if you've got multiple IDP servers. So they'll essentially become a bit more stateless. So you don't have to rely on things like Terracotta, which is what we're using at the moment. There will be support for Memcached to do this as well, if you absolutely must have your IDPs exchanging session data between each other. And I've also been looking at another fairly interesting thing called Moonshot, which has just went live and is they've now called it JISC Ascent, and it's actually based on FreeRadius 2 and with SAML and the additional SAML functionality provided by the Shibboleth libraries. And from the get-go, they've got this idea of having a more sort of devolved management model, and basically having the federation. Although the federation will be able to establish things at the top level, you can actually go and speak to another institution directly and establish trust links without even having to include the federation, which is quite nice. And they also want to have they've also got multi-protocol support at the moment. It's SSH, web via ModOff, Kerb, and Exchange as well. But the idea is basically anything that can have a Moonshot client and server connected to it will be able to use that protocol. The disadvantages of Moonshot, though, are at the moment it's requiring very much bleeding edge versions of FreeRadius and OpenSSH and Kerberos, and so the dependency management is a bit of for actually deploying it is a bit of a headache. And another issue, because it's based in FreeRadius 3, if you want to look up how to do anything on the web, invariably that information will be based in FreeRadius 2, and the configuration is completely different. It was very much a work in progress, but it has just went from a pilot stage to being a service yesterday actually, and because of that, and because of the scarcity of actual guides and data on it, it's got a very steep learning curve, and the documentation isn't comprehensive. It's basically what people have kind of written up what's worked for them as they've went, and it also requires the software to be installed on both the client and the server side, which is a problem if you want people to use it on their home desktops, for example. And some of these are, e.g. OpenSSH is dependent on locally patched by Moonshot versions of the sort of common software, and they're still waiting on the patches getting submitted upstream, but it could be months, years before that actually happens, and you don't have to install the sort of locally patched version provided by the Moonshot developers. And that's really about all I've got to say. As I've said, I've kind of went through what the federations are, a bit about how Shibboleth works and the sort of components of it, and how that interaction happens, and kind of hopefully a very brief sort of window into what's going to happen in the future and the problems with the current state of play. So does anybody have any questions while I'm here? No. Oh, one question.
I don't know if you know this. We asked about authentication, federated authentication. Rather than Shibboleth, SAML 2, which to me looks almost exactly the same as Shibboleth. I know Shibboleth's based on SAML.
Yeah.
Do you know what the difference is between what's called Shibboleth and what's called SAML 2?
Shibboleth is a SAML 2 provider. All Shibboleth, OpenUP, they're all using SAML 2 as SAML 2 is basically a sort of language that describes how to transfer these things. And in theory, anything that speaks SAML 2 should be able to speak to a Shibbolized service or an OpenUP service. Basically that's it. They're basically sometimes they're used interchangeably as well. Something that's SAML 2 compliant and it's fairly vanilla should be able to speak to a Shibboleth identity provider or service provider, and vice versa. So I don't know if that's actually really answered your question. No.
I'll
Can commercial providers get into this? I'm thinking if you wanted to run a service that was basically, you wanted to aim it at current students, and the easiest way of doing that is to tell them to log in by your institution.
Yeah, I mean that was actually one of the things I was. That's where I said it's kind of grown, a growing area. There is actually a number of people using that sort of model. But basically, you become a member of the UK Federation and set up your service provider, and then when you become a member and you set up your service, it then becomes consumable, and then the identity provider should be able to see your service and use it.
Right, it's not like OpenID where you can just do it.
No, it's all managed by the Federation, and they basically they take your public key and stick it in and verify it, and then stick that in metadata that's constructed for your service, and then it becomes available at that point. But they're usually more than happy to kind of set these things up, and there is more and more commercial providers using it.
It's free.
And it's, I don't know if it is actually completely free. I think there might be a small charge. I don't actually work for the UK Federation, but it's very free for education establishments that are members of the Federation already. There might be a fee to actually join the Federation.
So I think it is free. It's free to join, but I think the UK Federation require certain requirements. So there's some they make you agree to certain commitments about the way in which you manage your identities.
Yeah.
So you have to agree to manage your accounts in a certain way. It's not reuse password. To reuse identities within 3 years, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
And you have to expire accounts fairly soon after something you
Your,
Yeah.
your application goes through the Federation operator in London, who's a member of the staff at Janet, and they're the ones to say if there would ever be a fee for you to use it. The members include people like Microsoft, they're actually members of it, So there's lots of student unions been running services through it. It's really rather extensive now.
Yeah, this is Monica. She actually works for the UK Federation, so she knows the answer better than me, in that respect. So yeah, so hopefully that's kind of answered it, your question.
It is possible.
Yes, and we are. I think they're. I don't know if the term actively encouraged, but I think that they are fairly open to it.
And also
so,
there's a help desk for anybody that needs help in setting it up or problems or attribute release. There's some really, really very highly qualified staff there. So you're not on your own.
Yeah, it's more whether you could access it as a purely commercial provider with basically no links to education other than you want to make sure people are current students. For
You're
example.
providing service to education. That's. I mean, I think Shibboleth, it all started off with journal publishers. That's
yeah.
wasn't it?
Well,
Really,
you
a
still
lot
have
of
the
the
afternoons
stuff
that we stuff
that
as
they.
separate paths.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Because they're providing services to education.
And I think there are definitely like some like sort of web stores that use Shibboleth. I think it's like studentdeals.co.uk. I think might be one of them. That that basically present students with a Shibboleth login, and they're exactly as you described. That's a purely commercial organisation who see students as a customer, and they're basically using that so they can provide them with a sort of common login rather than having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, well, so it's more verifying that they're a student rather
Yeah.
than
There is-
necessarily belonging.
There is some alternatives actually. If you were to join the Federation, anyone whose institutions in the Federation would be able to log into your services, but you wouldn't be able to know if they were students unless the university had agreed to release that information to you.
Yes, I suppose that's probably the staff also
Yeah.
the same. Well, depending on how the
But
institutions set
often
up.
you'll find universities are happy to do that, but that's part of
No.
the attribute.
In fact, I think that the default configuration is for UK Federation members as they get sent that scoped affiliation by default. Or certainly that's the way our IDP is set up. We do send it by default to UK Federation members. We don't send it by default to non-UK Federation members. But and that's basically done with a sort of access rule. And I think that's how it's documented on the UK Federation help pages on how to customise a stock Shibboleth IDP to work with the UK Federation. I think it does actually in the stands. It does have that rule in it. Anyone else? No. Okay. Well, thank you for listening. I hope I didn't fire through that too quickly, and hope you enjoyed it.